From the factory floor to the front lines, from the halls of power to the silent war in cyberspace, this is where America's future is decided. Welcome to Full Spectrum Frontiers, the podcast that explores the battles you see and the ones you don't. I'm Bennett Tanton, veteran, entrepreneur, and your guide through the shifting terrain of manufacturing, military strategy, the economy, politics, and culture. Here we cut through the noise, break down the threats, and shine a light on the opportunities that will shape the next chapter of our nation's story. This is Full Spectrum Frontiers. What if I told you that the future of U.S. national security isn't in the South China Sea or Ukraine or even in the halls of Congress? That it's actually unfolding in dusty cobalt mines deep in the Congo, along the coral-rimmed ports of the Indian Ocean, and in the rise of nations we once arrogantly called developing. Welcome back to Full Spectrum Frontiers. I'm your host, Bennett Tanton, and this show is for anyone who wants to understand how the full spectrum of conflict, economic, technical, informational, spiritual, and kinetic is reshaping our world. It's not just about tanks and treaties anymore. It's about trust, terrain, trade routes, and TikTok, all colliding in real time. And today we're taking a hard look at where the game is moving, and that's Africa and the Indian Ocean. You're not going to hear this laid out clearly on CNN or even half the so-called strategic briefings floating around DC, but here we connect the dots. See, these places used to be forgotten corners of American foreign policy. Resources were extracted, influence was bought, attention spans were short, but the tides have shifted. What was once overlooked is now central. Rare earth minerals, African soil, critical shipping lanes, Indian Ocean, rising political clout. The global South is done playing second fiddle. They're writing their own sheet music now. Meanwhile, the U.S. is stuck reacting, watching China lay down fiber optic cables and military outposts, while Russia funds chaos and instability like it's still 1985. And what are we doing? Chasing headlines and changing ambassadors. Today's episode is about flipping the lens, understanding why, where the fight happens tomorrow matters just as much as how it's fought. If we don't get serious about these regions, serious in our strategy and our partnerships, and yes, our presence, we're going to find ourselves watching the next global order be built without us. So buckle in, no fluff, no doom scrolling, and no echo chambers. Just honest talk about the real frontiers of conflict and opportunity. And if you've been enjoying this show, do me a solid. Like, share, and drop a review wherever you're listening. It helps way more than you think, and I read every single one of them. We're building something here, a community of thinkers, doers, and defenders of common sense. So let's cut right to it. If you don't control the inputs, you don't control the outcome. And in the 21st century, the inputs are minerals, not oil, not coal, but cobalt, lithium, rare earths, tantalum, niobium, this stuff your smartphones are made out of, your electric vehicles, the F-35, and the missile defense systems You cannot run without these things. And guess where most of this is? Africa. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've been here before, and yeah, you're right. Western powers have been extracting African resources for centuries. But what's happening now? It's not colonialism 2.0. It's strategic competition on steroids. Let me paint the picture. The Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, has nearly 70% of the world's cobalt. That's not a typo. 70%. And cobalt is critical to lithium-ion batteries, which power everything from electric vehicles to drones to satellite constellations. And if you're trying to go green and stay lethal at the same time, you need cobalt. And who's locking it down? China. Through state-owned enterprises and shell companies, Beijing now controls or owns outright over half of the DRC's cobalt production. They've built the roads, the refineries, and the ports. They've offered loans tied to infrastructure projects that quietly lock African nations into decades of debt, what some call debt trap diplomacy, and what I call economic handcuffs with a velvet lining. And here's the kicker. They're not just buying the minerals. They're controlling the processing. The West extracts, China refines. That means even when we think we've got the raw material, it still has to pass through Chinese hands to become usable tech. Meanwhile, what's the U.S. doing? Well, to be fair, there are some moves being made. The State Department launched something called the Minerals Security Partnership. The Pentagon is throwing money at domestic mining and recycling efforts, and the DFC, that's the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, has greenlit financing for a cobalt processing plant in Zambia. But compared to China's footprint, we're showing up with a paper map to a digital war. Now, look, I'm not saying we should be building secret military bases in the jungle or bribing ministers. That's not how we win this. But we do need a full spectrum approach. We need strategic investment, not just aid, but actual partnerships that respect African sovereignty and bring value both ways. Onshore processing capability, so we're not dependent on the Chinese refineries. Stronger alliances with African nations, ones that go beyond photo ops and into shared tech, security cooperation, and joint ventures. Private sector muscle, because we're not going to win this with government alone. American businesses need to get in the game responsibly. And don't think this is just about minerals. It's about influence. China and Russia are offering education programs, military training, surveillance tech, infrastructure, even culture exchange. It's soft power and hard assets deployed with purpose. What are we offering? Seminars and the State Department tweets. If we want to have a seat at the table in the next global order, Africa cannot be the afterthought. It has to be part of the foundation, because if we let others control the inputs, the minerals, the mines, the money, we're going to be stuck reacting to a world that someone else is building. And here's the hopeful part. It's not too late. Africa wants partners, not patrons. Many countries don't want to be owned by China or exploited by Russia. They want infrastructure that actually works, clean governance, stable investment, and tech transfer. That's a playing field where America should thrive if we're willing to show up with respect, humility, and long-term commitment. All right, next up, we shift from land to sea. So let's talk about the Indian Ocean, why it's suddenly a front row seat to the next major power struggle, and why whoever controls those waters controls the world's arteries. Most people don't think about the Indian Ocean. It doesn't trend. It's not flashy. It doesn't get the same attention as the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. But if you zoom out and follow the trade routes, fuel lines, and fiber optic cables, you realize this body of water stretching from the East African coast to the Straits of Malacca is one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. Let's break it down. Over 80% of global maritime oil trade passes through the Indian Ocean. We're talking about massive tankers moving through choke points like the Straits of Hormuz between Iran and Oman, bottleneck for Persian Gulf oil. The Bab el-Mandeb between Djibouti and Yemen, gateway to the Suez Canal. The Straits of Malacca between Indonesia and Malaysia, key to East Asia's energy supply. And if any of those points are disrupted by conflict, piracy, cyber attack, or even just political chaos, the whole system gets backed up. Prices spike, trade halts, navies scramble. The ripple effect isn't just regional, it's global. So now, enter the players. China has been executing a masterclass in long-term positioning. Their string of pearls strategy, yes, that's a real term, involves setting up a network of ports, refueling stations, and logistics hubs along the Indian Ocean rim. Some are commercial on paper, but dual use in practice. Let's name a few. Godar, Pakistan, built and operated by China. Hambantota, Sri Lanka, leased to China for 99 years. Djibouti, home to China's first overseas military base, right near our own Camp Lemonnier. Add in infrastructure deals across Kenya, the Maldives, and Tanzania, and you've got a slow but steady maritime footprint being laid, one that can support naval projection, economic control, and intelligence collection. India is countering hard. They see the Indian Ocean as their natural backyard. Duh, it's even named after them. And they're not wrong. They've increased naval patrols, built up the Andaman and Nicobar Command, and deepened ties with Australia, Japan, and the U.S. through the Quad Alliance. The U.S., for our part, has some incredible assets here. The crown jewel is Diego Garcia, a remote but critical base in the British Indian Ocean territory. It gives us reach across the Middle East, East Africa, and South Asia. But let's be real. Outside of Diego and the occasional joint exercise, our presence in the region is pretty thin. We're still treating it like a secondary theater. And frankly, that's a mistake. Because here's the thing. China doesn't need to dominate the Indian Ocean. They just need to deny us uncontested access. If they can slow down shipping, threaten choke points, or create uncertainty, they've already gained leverage. And if conflict ever breaks out, God forbid, control of these waters could decide the outcome before the first shot is even fired. And don't sleep on non-state threats either. Piracy off Somalia and Yemen they've dipped, but it's not dead. Terror groups are operating in Mozambique. Undersea cables have already been targeted by saboteurs in other parts of the world. The Indian Ocean is wide open and vulnerable. So what do? It starts with acknowledging that the region is no longer a passive transit zone. It's a battlefield of influence. The U.S. needs a persistent maritime strategy in the Indian Ocean that includes forward basing, expanding logistical support even with regional allies, naval diplomacy, joint exercises with India, Australia, Kenya, and others, tech investments, monitoring undersea cable integrity, AI-assisted shipping security, and cyber defense platforms tied to maritime assets. Strategic partnerships, not just military to military, but economic and educational. So we're not just seen as a military presence, but as a long-term partner. And we need to start speaking the local language, not just linguistically, but culturally. These nations want more than just flybys and port visits. They want real investment. That's our opportunity, not to dictate, but to collaborate, because the Indian Ocean isn't quiet anymore. It's alive, it's contested, and it may be the stage where the balance of power quietly shifts while the rest of the world isn't paying any attention. Let's get one thing straight. The global South isn't asleep at the wheel anymore. These countries, often referred to as developing, emerging, or worse, third world, are done playing the background. They're stepping into the geopolitical ring, not as pawns, but as players. And some of them, they're swinging with surprising force. It's time we stop acting like influence only flows from the West outward, because now the global South is leveraging what it's got geographically, natural resources, population size, trade routes to negotiate new terms in a world that's rapidly becoming multipolar. So, what does this even mean? Well, first, it means countries aren't picking sides like they used to. This isn't Cold War 2.0. Nations like India, Brazil, Kenya, Indonesia, they're not jumping onto NATO's lap or flying Chinese flags. They're working both sides, maximizing leverage. They see them attend Western economic forums one week and then host Russian, Iranian, or Chinese delegations the next. And let's be real, can you blame them? For decades, the Global South has been lectured, sanctioned, manipulated, and in many cases outright ignored, except when the resources were convenient. But now, with shifting demographics, growing tech ecosystems, and access to the capital from multiple directions, they're reasserting sovereignty in a big way. Just look at BRICS. Once considered a loose economic alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS has evolved. And in 2024, it expanded to include Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and others. And suddenly it doesn't look like a casual economic club anymore. It looks like a counterweight, a potential alternative to the US-led G7. And it's pulling in other nations who are tired of Western financial systems dictating the rules of the game. Now, let's hit pause for a second, because it'd be easy to turn this into an anti-US rant. But that's not what we're doing here. The truth is This moment presents opportunity, not just threat, if we're willing to adapt. See, the U.S. still has what the world wants. They have innovation. We have entrepreneurship, military reliability, and a culture that, at its best, still inspires. But we've got to stop assuming that's enough. It's not. Influence isn't inherited, it's earned and re-earned. We need a new model of engagement, one based on mutual benefit, humility, and strategic realism. Here's what that could look like. Flexible partnerships. All right. Not rigid alliances, but coalitions that align around shared interests, even if values diverge. Not every partner is going to check all the boxes. Welcome to the real world, folks. Next, we've got infrastructure diplomacy. We need to compete with China's Belt and Road with our own blend of public-private partnerships. Real roads, real ports, real results, not lectures. Tech transfer plus talent development. We should be investing in education, research, and training programs in key countries. This is how you create long-term allies, not just users, but co-creators of innovation. Next, respectful engagement. Too often we show up with aid and a PowerPoint. These countries aren't looking for charity. They want deals, investment, jobs, and autonomy. Let's stop viewing influence as a zero-sum game. If the global south is rising, good. Let's rise with them. Let's build bridges instead of walls. Because if we don't, others will. Others will. And they already are. You know, one of the biggest lies we've been told is that the world only works when we're calling the shots. But maybe the better play is to become the partner that everyone wants in the room, not because we demand it, but because we actually earn it. So what does all this mean? Africa, the Indian Ocean, the rise of the global south? What does this all tell us? It tells us that the front lines of national security aren't always on a battlefield. They're in boardrooms, data centers, mineral contracts, and shipping lanes. They're in how we show up, how we invest, and how we listen. It's a lot to take in, but it's also energizing. The world is changing, and if we start to play, it's a lot to take in, but it's also energizing. The world is changing, and if we play it smart, so can we. All right, we're almost wrapped. Now let's bring this home. Africa isn't just a humanitarian talking point. It's the mineral backbone of the future. The Indian Ocean isn't just water. It's a battlefield for logistics, trade, and power projection, and the global south. In a collection of underdogs, not a collection of underdogs anymore. It's a block, and it's rewriting the rules. What we're looking at is a shifting map, one where geography, diplomacy, and economics collide in real time. And if the U.S. wants to stay in the game, we've got to just stop playing defense with outdated strategies. We need to show up with real intent, long-term, proactive, full spectrum engagement. That means understanding nuance, which we're not the best at. That means building trust where there's skepticism. And that means accepting that the new chapter in American strength doesn't come from dominance, but from partnership. Because let me tell you, the days of assuming the world just aligns with us because we're America, those days are fading, and they're fading fast. We've got to earn it again. And you know what? We can. We absolutely can. We've done this before, innovated, collaborated, rebuilt, but we've got to adapt faster than the competition. The window is still open, but it won't stay open forever. So what's next? It's on you and me and everyone who cares about where we're headed. Share this conversation, start your own, stay curious, ask harder questions. We need more people thinking beyond headlines, people who see the world not just as it is, but as it's becoming. And if this episode gave you something to chew on, if it helped reframe the way you think about national security or global power dynamics, then do me a favor, like it, review it, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Whether you're in the military, the private sector, education, or just a citizen who cares, your voice, your awareness, it matters. So until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and remember, the frontier isn't a place, it's a mindset. I'll see you in the next one.